Well, first of all, let me introduce myself. Let me not be rude. My name is Amber Jones. I am the Senior Director of Network Insights for the African American Leadership Forum, where I focus on our community engagement and advocacy work. And I've been on staff with the organization since June, but I also am a 2015 Josie R. Johnson Leadership Academy alumni. And so I'm really excited to be before you today as Nyla is getting some really necessary rest. So we just want to send our good vibes out to her and making sure that she can rest and heal well. So we just thank you for her. We thank you for this great team that we have here with the organization here at AALF. So as we get started, just a couple of quick reminders. First of all, we are so glad you are here. We are so glad that you have joined us today to share space. We would love to see your faces. So please turn on your cameras, click through and see who's here, who's in the room. Obviously in a virtual space, we can only connect so much. So all the ways that we're able to connect with each other in the chat or with your cameras on, please engage with those if able. But also please mute your mics so that we don't have any background noise as we are engaging in today's conversation. And if you have any questions, you can use the hand raise function, but most importantly, what would be easiest is to just drop your questions in the chat. We're gonna have a very robust conversation with our guest speaker today. And obviously we are really excited to dig into all the post-election results and the implications for our community with that as well. And then finally, as I've said several times already, please add your name, your city, and if applicable, your organization, as well as your pronouns in the chat so that we know who's in the room this afternoon. So as we move forward into today's program, we are going to start with some important AALF updates, just so that you know what's going on here at AALF and you can find ways to get connected and to support the work. So our first AALF update, as you all know, we are in the month of November, so it is Give to the Max season. So November is an important month for many nonprofits, including ours here at AALF. It is time for sharing the value of giving to causes that are meaningful and relevant to you and your community. The African American Leadership Forum has been a meaningful and relevant pillar in our community since 2006, establishing collective action and seeing the power of collective wisdom. The foundational framework in 2006, which was established in 2006, has propelled AALF to new heights with an opportunity for unprecedented and unapologetic impact. So we really hope that you will consider sharing our work with your network and pledging your contribution of any amount to support future AALF programming. Our team member here at AALF will share information in the chat on how to give. We really want to continue to build the work here at AALF to build collective Black power and Black advancement for this region, and we need your support to be able to do it. So please consider to give to the max between now and November 17th. You don't have to wait until November 17th. You can give today. Your donation makes a difference. Our next announcement this morning is actually part of my body of work with the United by Black, Powered by All initiative. We are really excited to get rolling on engaging our community on matters of employment. How do we ensure that the Black community, in particular Black Minnesotans, are able to maintain dignified and stable careers that provide for their families, provide for their livelihoods, and also really tap into their own passions and strengths. So we invite community members who are interested and invested in strengthening outcomes for employment in the Black community and who are willing to share ideas, aspirations, and desires to join our United by Black employment community listening sessions. These sessions will focus on sharing employment data in the Black community, key insights that have been collected, and welcoming our community members to share their vision of creating a community where all Black people have sustainable and dignified careers. Our goal is to share your insights and experiences along with a clear statement of aspiration with our impact partners to inform how we best align resources to drive change, improvements, and ultimately achievements that truly matter. This work is really important. We need to hear directly from our community so that as we are building our recommendations to go to business, to go to government, to go to philanthropy about how we can improve employment outcomes in our community, we know we have the strength of the community's voice behind us. So please come out to one of our listening sessions. We will have a live in-person session. Dinner will be provided on Thursday, December 7th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Powerhorn Recreation Center. And then on December 14th, we will have a virtual session via Zoom at 12 o'clock p.m. So you can join any one of those sessions. You don't have to join both. It'll be the same content. In addition, if you are like, I love this work, Amber, and I want to help out, I want to support, now, we are actually looking for volunteers to help facilitate some of the small group conversations. So if you love to connect with people in a one-on-one or a small group setting, and you really want to support this work, there will also be information in the chat to sign up to be a table facilitator. Thank you so much for your support. Please come prepared to share, listen, and learn. All of the perspectives from our community are welcome. So as we wrap up this afternoon's announcements, I am so incredibly excited to introduce our contributor spotlight for today. First of all, we have had an amazing election season, and there have been so many people in the community who've been doing great work to engage our community, to make sure that they are civically engaged. And I'm so incredibly excited to welcome one of those leaders into the room today to talk about this important work and its implications for our community. So I'm really excited to welcome to the network monthly meetup, Cheniqua Johnson. And y'all gotta give me some time to read her bio because she is decorated and accomplished. And you wouldn't tell because she's so young and beautiful, but she's been putting it in work. So Cheniqua Johnson is a public servant, grant maker, and community organizer. In her current role at the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, she supports the work of nonprofit organizations throughout the Metro and in Greater Minnesota. Cheniqua is responsible for reviewing grant making in health and civic engagement. In a little over a year with the foundation, Cheniqua has assisted in moving over $3 million from the foundation to community through grant making and reviewed 600 plus applications. In addition, Cheniqua is also the current state outreach and inclusion officer for the Minnesota Democratic Farmer and Labor Party, where she engages voters across the state. And she's also the co-founder of In Sisterhood We Brunch, a quarterly brunch series for women and gender non-binary folks, as well as an alumna of the Twin Cities chapter of the New Leaders Council. And most importantly, she's an African American Leadership Forum 2019 Dr. Josie R. Johnson Leadership Academy Fellow. Cheniqua was a first generation college student, graduate, and TRIO alum who received her Bachelor of Science degree in Family Social Science from the University of Minnesota. Post-graduation, Cheniqua has worked in community organizing, politics, and at Congress. Some of her previous roles include being a legislative assistant for the United States House of Representatives Subcommittee on Aviation, an honorary city council member of her hometown, Worthington, Minnesota, a staff assistant for former Congressman and now Attorney General, twice now, Keith Ellison, and a former candidate for the Minnesota State Representative. Outside of work, Cheniqua can be found socializing, organizing, and tapping into anything musical. She's a huge fan of live music, and she loves to travel, plan events, bring people together, and enjoy a good time on the beach. So I am so excited to welcome Cheniqua here. She is a good friend of mine, and she has been such a strong supporter of AALF. And so thank you for sharing space with us today.
That's really exciting. So glad to be here. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. So Cheniqua, before we talk about all the things midterm elections, because there's a lot to unpack, I want to give space for our guests to just learn more about who you are. So Cheniqua, can you talk about what inspired you to begin working in politics and organizing, and what have been some of your biggest lessons so far?
One of the things like I always love to start with folks is like, I think when we think about politics, we're like, you have to have a certain resume or there has to be something that like I genuinely was not growing up thinking I would work in politics. I was basically just trying to get out of high school into the Twin Cities, get into college. I think I honestly was like, I'm going to go for law school. I had no idea what that meant. So I did not start out thinking or probably even have a lot of interest as a kid in politics. I ended up working for the Humphrey School of Public Affairs Roy Wilkins Center, and I met Dr. Myers, Jr., who is literally a force, just a tenured African-American faculty member. This man literally came and kind of just took me under his wing as a first-year student. I started as an admin assistant and really didn't even know what I was going to get myself into. I didn't know who some of the civic icons like Josie Johnson or Roy Wilkins at all were, because I, again, came from rural Minnesota. And through that experience, really just learned a lot about who were the politicians, who were the elected officials, who were the policymakers. And in so many different ways, a lot of those folks didn't always look like me, and they definitely didn't come from where I came from. And so a lot of the stories, and I think just like the main thing around why I continue to do this work, there's so many people that often are not included in the conversation as it relates to policy making, things that direct our day-to-day lives, and for sure in just the realm of politics, right? We're seeing still the first being elected to things, first Black women elected into the Minnesota State Senate, the first Black Somali woman elected into the Senate, the first Black, third Black county commissioner in the state of Minnesota being elected to the board. And so there's definitely still a lot of new. And I think it just energizes me every time, because you guys heard the resume, right? Like I have different positions in different spaces, but to have been in multiple levels of government, to now work with, directly as an outreach and inclusion officer with the state party, I get to see who they listen to and who some of their task force are, right? Their think tanks or like organizations that actually write the policies that our legislators pass. And so often it's like pivotal that Black people, but more importantly to like young Black women, men, are in these conversations, because we are literally running like multiple campaigns. We're running these spaces to get people elected when people are trying to learn even the simplest things about where community is. They come to people like us, and they come to people that look like Amber and I, to really be at the pulse of where community stands, because hopefully, and especially moving forward, we need to have more just everyday people involved in politics. It doesn't have to keep looking like what it has been. And I think that that's what's been really motivating for me. And I intentionally want to, one thing I think that's never mentioned in like the bio that's always important for folks, and like during the day, right? Like I'm literally a 27-year-old Black woman living in Minnesota trying to figure out like, where am I gonna post up in this Zoom? Like, where am I gonna have my internet connection? And what are my lights gonna do today? Like, I'm really just, yes, I've done these different things, but politics is about the people, right? The community. And so, yeah, that's pretty much why I'm in it. And that's definitely why I stay involved.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that, Cheniqua. I love what you said, politics about the people. The root word for politics really just means citizen. It's not anything big and flashy. It's everyday people, like you said, and really trying to demystify what that means. Like politics is really just making sure I am concerned about the welfare of the everyday citizen, right? I want to talk a little bit about, you say you come from a rural background, you were born and raised in Worthington, Minnesota, and I really would like to hear more about how your upbringing in rural Minnesota has really informed how you show up in your work. And then also, a lot of times when we talk about, Black people showing up in the state, we are thinking a lot about the metropolitan area. And so how can we continue to expand our perspective so that we can be more inclusive of our community members who are across the state in different localities?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot too, when it comes to the fact that we just have to understand, right, that much like the rest of the country, there are Black people and brown people everywhere, but specifically in like the Black community and the African American community throughout the state of Minnesota, we have been so vital to the history here, to a lot of the advancements, and really just paving the way for a lot of our colleagues and places to expand. And that includes the policy and the political sphere as well. And so when we think about places like Worthington, where I grew up, you should also understand that there's a lot of similarities between where I came from to where I live now on the east side of St. Paul, right? Where folks sometimes go through this space of just wanting to make sure their voices are heard, but it goes deeper than that. Like my father grew up in Kansas. My mom is from Memphis, Tennessee, and both had spent decades in Worthington, Minnesota, a small town, 13,000 people, where we might have been the only Black family on the block growing up for me, but before, some of the Black African American folks, right, like they were there for work. The similar stories that came from what we're seeing now with the migration and immigration to our state from across the world really is the focus of the same things that some of our Black folks that moved during the 60s, 70s, and 80s to the state came for: work, job, opportunity, education, all of those similar things. And so, I definitely think that growing up in an intergenerational family, my father was in his 90s when he passed in 2015. And so to put in perspective for folks, like he was born in 1919, right? I am 2 generations max removed from slavery. And so when you think about that and his experience growing up during the heart of the civil rights movement, like he knew what it was like to have to get his shoes in the back of the stores here in Minnesota. Like, right, he had those experiences in Minnesota. To now fast forward to seeing me, right, running for office at 22, or graduating from high school and going to the University of Minnesota. Those were a lot of his dreams for me, and like a lot of the ways that he really wanted to make sure that I had the opportunities and access to those. My mom, same. She was born 4 days after Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in Memphis, Tennessee. And so having different experiences where here we are, people are living through those same type of experience now in modern day, asking for the same things that some of our ancestors, as well so as our like grandparents and our parents were asking for, especially around like public safety, home ownership. My family didn't own a home. I'm the first person in my family to do so. Places and community members, whether they're on the east side of St. Paul and the Rondo community in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, or in Duluth, have some of the same issues when it comes to access, and access to what, right? Affordable housing for whom? Reproductive rights. Okay, reproductive rights from whom? Because the bodies of Black women are constantly in attack, because we have the highest Black maternal death rates in the state, the lowest education outcomes for Black kids and Black youth in the country. What does that look like? And that's not new, right? Like that's stuff that our families have advocated for decades. But that's sometimes the story that doesn't always get told. And it's very often centric on like, not only just the Twin Cities, but like, that's not a conversation happening across the state.
Mm-hmm. Man, there's so many ways, there's so many places I can go with what you just laid out, but I think it was really important to hear how you were tracing all the ways that policies and systemic actions continue to show up, even in the here and now today. That legacy still continues on, and the work that you are doing in political advocacy is directly addressing those things. And I think it's really important to call us back to our own stories, right? Our own stories, our own heritage, our own legacy that we're carrying, because those things can very much still inform how we are showing up. And so I thank you for that reminder that so much of, like, we keep talking about politics about the everyday citizen, but politics means it's shaped by our stories, right? It's shaped by our experiences, it's shaped by our knowledge, our collective knowledge, our familial wisdom. And just being able to keep calling back that into the work that we're doing, like in how the things that you are doing are ways to show honor to your father, to show honor to your parents, right? I wanted to, before we go into the next set of questions, I just want to remind people on the call, we also want to take your questions as well. So please use the chat so that we can see what kind of questions are coming up so that we can hit those questions too in the midst of this conversation. So thank you so much for that, Cheniqua. We're going to shift and start to talk about the midterm elections results, right? And wow, so much has happened, right? So much I think was unexpected. You know, a lot of political correspondents predicted certain outcomes that would happen both at the national and at the state level that did not actually happen. And so it'll be really interesting to hear from your perspective, what made that, like, what was the shift, you know, right? What was the shift? Why did we see particular elections results happen in ways that were unexpected or not predicted in that particular way? But especially for you to be very knee deep, specifically in Minnesota politics, as people who may or may not have been following here at the Minnesota level, all of the incumbents at the statewide level for governor and lieutenant governor, secretary of state, auditor, attorney general were all maintained by the Democrats. All of those incumbents won. The Minnesota State House of Representatives was able to hold on to their majority, and the Democrats actually flipped the Minnesota Senate. So the first time there's been a trifecta for the Democrats in a very long time. So we would love to talk a little bit more about those implications as we go into the 2023 session. But as you mentioned earlier, there's also been a lot of historic wins this year as well to continue to advance and to diversify the landscape, including 3 Black women in the Minnesota State Senate, right? And so we want to continue to lift up some of those, Zainab Mohammed, Claire Verbetten, and Erin McQuaid, right? So we'd love to just kind of hear your perspective of, okay, how do we make sense of these elections results and their implications for Black folks?
And as you were talking, you know, I was just looking up some of the numbers too from a national standpoint. And yes, so when you hear folks talk about a trifecta, for a long time, we were a split government system, one of the few state legislatures that were split, meaning that we had different parties in control of certain areas or body of government, Senate being Republican controlled, the House being Democratic controlled, and the governorship being Democratic controlled. And now we are no longer split, right? We have a trifecta in having Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor seats. And so when I look back at, to be honest, like when I think about what that actually means, I think I'm still grasping the totality of what opportunities have just opened up. And I also was like, and here we are in a space where I'm almost giving folks like a green light to really think about their priorities and understand just how crucial our involvement in the next 2 years are going to be. And not just in the sense of like a vote, right? So now that part is done. Whether you voted, I'm hoping that everyone voted on this call, being this is a space, but let's just say there's someone who did not vote. Whether you voted or not in this election, I think it's really important to consider the fact that today the work starts. Tomorrow, the work continues, and fast forward 2 years from now, we're going to be back here having a conversation again about a presidential election, right? And so here we are in a space where this is a continuous cycle. And so you're seeing a lot of things happen where some of our leaders now that have talked about issues that maybe you're passionate about, healthcare, driver's license for all, access to, affordable housing, transportation infrastructure advancements, public safety, banning no-knock warrants, a lot of the issues that folks have now campaigned on. There's a trifecta in the state legislature that basically can hear a lot of these issues. Their aides will be picked, right? The people that they will be working for, who's leading this work, their partners and their community organizations. That's what we're gearing towards, right? That's what this next session is going to entail. Because last session, there wasn't a lot of movement because it was blocked towards the end. So a lot of important decisions, organizations, bonding packages, funding for a lot of our schools were held at the state level. This time there's opportunity, and I think Amber definitely knows firsthand about that, and just some of the spaces where what it looks like on Capitol Hill here in St. Paul versus what it can look like in the next year. Super vital that people are involved, that they're contacting their electeds. This is the time like to cash in on that vote. Like what can be happening in November 8th, right? Was the vote. They wanted that vote from you. They got that vote. There was people who were victorious in that and are now here, right? We have 3 Black women. It's like literally the first time that that's ever happened, right? So like, what does that leadership look like to actually have Black maternal health or health in general in the Black community talked about with Black legislature women who have lived through it, right? When we look at Erin McQuaid, during the primary, she's now going to be like, right, a state senator over in Minnesota, but during the primary, she literally went into labor during her caucus, where she was seeking the DFL endorsement. Those are experiences that some people are not physically able to have. And so what does that look like? They're not capable, like there's a space to have a richer conversation about a lot of these issues now. The most diverse state legislature that we've seen ever, and the first time in a long time that some of the blocks that were more political may not be there, but that does not mean that we give everyone a pass. That very much means that today we have to stay involved and we have to start asking, you know, for the funding streams that we need, all of those things. And so I think from a political sphere, that's what you're seeing right now. People are literally reflecting on the fact that what they wanted to do happened. The Democratic Party wanted to flip the Senate, it's flipped. Right, the House has leadership majority, and the governor, Governor Tim Walz and Peggy Flanagan, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan are now in office for another 4 years, along with like the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, Julie Blaha, who's the state auditor, Steve Simon. Some of these elected officials are now literally coming back off of that, knowing that the next few years are going to look a certain way. That means that there's like a space for us to then start thinking, what can that look like for us? And making sure that we're talking to those folks that came and knocked on our door, that organized and have campaigns, and started to really be like, okay, so here's my vote. You know, that I voted sticker, I'm cashing it in because this is the things that I care about and want to see happen. And those are the conversations that are going to be happening now, leading up to essentially the decisions that are making at the state ledge. But for sure, between now and January, those are the conversations that are happening currently. Like I'm almost positive this evening, the party will be talking about priorities, identifying leadership, trying to figure out who's going to be leading and what. People should pay attention to know like what a majority leader does, right? What does the Speaker of the House do? They lead, and what is heard at committees, who, if you want your state rep to be on a certain committee, tell them. If you're trying to get a couple policies heard, some rights talked about that you're not hearing, this is the time to contact those people and let them know.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you, Cheniqua, is go big or go home. That's what I'm hearing. And I want to contextualize that between being in a political climate, particularly we're a nonpartisan organization, but being in a particular political climate where there was a split legislature and the expectations around that versus a political climate where there is not a split legislature. And I think that will be helpful to kind of break down a little bit more as far as what should we be able to expect from our legislators and our state leaders about what is possible, especially for Black communities, especially coming out of a pandemic where disparities have become even more exacerbated, coming out of over 2 years now of a referendum on racial justice and public safety. What type of expectations should we have for our leaders and our decision makers to deliver big on the promises that they have made and the mandates needed to really help to lift our communities, Black communities, into a higher level of prosperity and growth?
I feel like the expectations themselves come from, right, the hearings and things being heard at the state level, bill language that maybe has been not able to make movement on. When you have a split government system, no matter who is like in the majority of what, having a split government system often has heavy party like tension, whether it's the Democratic or Republicans. It's literally like, oh, this bill is given by the Republican Party, so the Democrats may vote in a way that is in against it, whether or not it's like a party line space. And sometimes good policy can get caught up in party lines. And I think that that's where, you have to be honest about that, whether like you're Democratic or Republican, sometimes good stuff. And when good things are held up at the state, everyday people suffer. Some of the people who are literally most impacted by the pandemic were Black people, were brown people, Black trans people, like queer people. And there were multiple dollars surplus of money that was not able to be expended because of the split legislature. So like you have a space where now I think there's an opportunity to really think about, right, the Republican representation, just because there's a Democratic majority, doesn't just go away. And there's still a need to work there. And the policy spaces of what people can expect can really be around major, right now across the state, no matter who you talk to, safety, Blacks, like public safety, Black safety, anything from criminal justice reform, police accountability, but further than that, safe homes, safe communities. That is a topic for discussion that has been very polarized over the last few years. And I think where we have an opportunity to take advancing is if you remove, right, how the chips will fall in the state Senate and the state House in regards to who has the majority, who does not. What you don't know is based off of that, where people's stances are on banning things like no knock warrants. What you don't know is where people's stances are around how we are, investing not only in it's not just investing in like our police force, but investing in our infrastructures to make sure that we have safe spaces, investing in housing so we don't have people who are literally on shelter, because that's a public safety issue. You have this space where there are opportunities to start investing in our, public schools, our private schools, all the different things that come through, because the root of it is around health. It is around like whether or not I can walk off the street tomorrow and feel this way, but that all kind of ties back to which areas of funding are we able to use and how we're willing to use our surplus and dollars that we have. And so, and also maybe even, really honing in on what racial justice looks like for the next few years. People have talked about it. What is the investment? There are different issues right now happening in the Twin Cities, conversations that aren't happening statewide. Reparations is one of them. Black maternal health is another. How the state gets involved in that is a new conversation that might be a new opportunity to really hone in on what that actually means. Because some of those languages some of those bills that people worked on weren't heard at the Capitol. They weren't given an opportunity for a vote because they weren't heard, we didn't have the Senate leadership to hear it at the agenda. So some of those things where now these bills that have been just like in limbo, this might be an opportunity to hear them and to actually entertain what it might look like for the state to have a role in economic justice and racial justice and home ownership, in public safety, in environmental safety, those things that come through that everybody has been hearing about. And then like for me, where I would personally like to see is like, there needs to have a really robust conversation on reproductive rights, because although we have had some very strong spaces here across, and when you put it in comparison between the nation, Minnesota is constantly at attack for that. There's a space nationwide where we're kind of on an island right now in the Midwestern region of places that allow access to all forms of women's healthcare and women's rights. It's not just access to abortions, it's also access to like just your general screenings, your healthcare screenings, your spaces to have, just the everyday space. And that's not necessarily a politic issue. Like it shouldn't be a party issue. We might have an actual chance right now to have a robust conversation around that, and do a little bit more on permanently protecting our rights to choose. So that's my thoughts.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to start to hit some of these questions in our chat. If you have any additional questions before our conversation is up, please send them. So Robin Frazier, she is asking, can you define dark money? Yes. Can you define dark money and talk about how people can pour millions into our state to attack our leaders? And what can we do about that?
Well, like dark money can come from a lot of things, Ms. Frazier, especially when it comes to like collateral PAC money and massive
What's a
organizations.
PAC?
So, okay, political action committees. So basically, like organizations that there were a lot of organizations, individual donors, major lobbying entities that basically go and advocate heavily and support within either party, like at the national capital in DC. Some folks have these firms that kind of operate that can pour so much money into campaigns because they are not restricted on like maximum contributions, and often have a very long network of people that can pour in quote unquote dark money, or money that usually has a catch. When you think about like, and usually that catch is like quite the catch. It's you know, it's racist, it's Islamophobic, it's homophobic, it's the things that you saw on the ads. And I would say, like, I know that we've all seen them, right? We were flooded with ads throughout the state of Minnesota. I think in a very large, this is part of the, you know, the $70 million is a space to talk about the fact that this was a lot of the most money that we have seen in a long time get flooded into state campaigns, both for congressional offices, but also towards our state leaders. And so now you're going to see a lot of those ads, quote unquote, go away. But like, they weren't attacking the policies. They weren't attacking the decisions. They were outright lying.
Yeah.
And so like that space of dark money is like, it's not there to tell the truth or really to inform people, which is where we should be spending our resources. It was really to inform your decision or try to dictate what you thought of someone's individual character and ability. And so that's something that I think where like these ads that were coming through were misinforming a lot of people. And so I would encourage folks too, especially to just take a minute and reflect on like, what do I know, right, about those folks? Because I saw a bunch of stuff, people, and they were some people that I have never met, right? And if I want to, I can. And if you want to have a conversation about an ad that you saw that maybe you were like, did this really happen? Was this the case, right? Like I heard this, especially I have to do this a lot in Worthington because in rural Minnesota, sometimes people did not have access to like actually meeting Keith directly. So I'm using him as an example because we all know who he is, but like they were targeting multiple people, or organizing fronts that were just literally spewing a lot of things. Like if I judged off of what I knew and what I saw when I would go home to my mom's house about Keith, it would be like a lot about, you know, I would think that Minneapolis was this place that burned a lot of things to the ground and there was no sort of enforcements, no sort of policy, just a lot of chaos and confusion. But what I wouldn't know is how long Keith spent was spent in government and policy, but also as a practicing attorney, right? What I wouldn't know is decisions that were made to prosecute the police versus not prosecuting an actual officer. Those are questions that I think people have the right to have a conversation with him about. If you want to know people's stances on certain things like reparations, you can ask about that, because the ads may go away, right? But those people are here. They live in Minnesota, they're a part of it. And that's what a lot of this money was, a lot of outside dollars, a lot of people who do not live here, who are not in our everyday lives, who were here to inform and persuade people to vote a certain way in an election. And so I don't know if it's gonna go away. And as far as like the question of what to do in the future, I think that the education part of it is going to be the biggest, your tool, and to utilize our fronts as leaders and as people to realize that we can put together a group of 5 people or 10 people and 15 people, and we can ask for a meeting. We can sit and talk about to these people and ask them, okay, so now that you're not in an election, I'd like to take you out and bring you over to the North Side, and we have people that want to talk to you. And they want to talk specifically about this ad that we saw or this space that we saw, but they want to talk about public housing. They want to talk about the new building that's going up around BIPOC businesses over in North Minneapolis. Those things that like we have to make sure that our community members aren't just constantly arguing with each other about what they saw, but that they're actually able to hear from the source. And the more work that we can do there to ensure that more people are able to ask their questions directly to those people, they'll care less about those ads that are going to come out again in 2 years, next year during our city elections, 4 years when we have to do this all over again, because those people will be like, nope, I met so-and-so, whatever. I met Julie, and now I see an ad that doesn't meet her character. I don't think that's right. Because those aren't going to go away. Keith's not going to magically wake up tomorrow and not be a Black man running for state attorney general, right? Like he's the only and first Black person we've ever had elected to a statewide office. He's not going to wake up tomorrow and his race is not going to change. His religion is not going to change. Those things that come through his policies aren't going to change. And he's not going to magically stop upholding the law. So like those things that will continue to come back again for a conversation, that's what we can do right now. How do we educate people on a massive level so they get a chance to hear directly from our people and from the source?
Thank you for that, Cheniqua. And I think one of the key things that I kind of raised from your answer was that relationships matter. Relationships are important. And not just relationships directly with candidates or elected officials, but relationships with each other and the ways in which we are able to dispel myths and rumors and be able to educate our own people in our own communities and being able to really stand in the gap, because one person can't be everywhere. But when it comes to really being able to ensure that our communities are well informed, we can take on that work as well, whether or not we're trying to be someone's elected official. So I'm gonna get to try to get 1 to 2 more questions in before we wrap up. So I think you kind of talked about this a little bit. I just want to make sure that we touched it, but how is our approach for economic, racial, and social justice focused legislation either change, increase, or pivot now that there's a different power structure? I think you kind of raised some of this, but if there's anything quickly that you would like to add before we get to our next question.
Yeah, I think like here, there again, just reminding folks that we have the ability to kind of set the stage for what a lot of these brackets of work look like. I think there's an ability to talk about restoring the vote. I think there's an ability to access around voter protections in general. There's going to be a lot of from a national level, just because there's a Democratic majority does not mean there will be a bunch of bills that have been passed in Republican states coming to Minnesota or attempting to be heard here. Language that may not be coded in a different way, but like when it comes to restoring the vote and voters protections, it may take 4 years, 6 years to make an advancement on things that take a year to destroy. So when it comes to like voter protections and voter rights, when it comes to access and to affordable housing units, other things that are happening and dictated here at the state level, there are bills currently, and that's kind of where we can start to is like there are bill language that was currently not heard during the last year that most likely we picked up, but conversations that maybe haven't had, like even paternal rights, when it comes to just what we need to do to bring, to keep our families united, a lot of things that are going through with bill language that people like Representative Moran had worked on, who's now going to, be a county commissioner over in Ramsey County. But those bills that Ruth Richardson, who was a state representative, who now is being reelected, what does that look like to carry and really just go back to those folks and see, Representative Frazier, like what are some things that were held up that have not been heard, especially in the Black community? There were a lot of Black specific bills and bills that would benefit Black families, Black well-being, Black health, Black moms, that were not heard last session. And those bills are the languages that and opportunities that we have now when we talk about racial justice. Racial justice has not been declared at the state level. There's been no bills to pass through like to make immediate progress in what that looks like for the state of Minnesota. How do you undo racial disparities and racial inequities if you don't talk about race? And so how do we do that at a robust level? We have to first start with the initial conversations. And so I think there is some opportunity now to ask for those hearings, to ask for those bills to be heard. to make some leniency and also find people that can actually start advocating for them on the grassroots level too. So we can get people to talk about everyday issues and get more of our neighbors and spaces to get to the Capitol to actually have a hearing and talk about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And I know you said this 1,001 times, so I'm not asking to be repetitive, but I really want to distill it down because you have shared a multitude of calls to action here. You shared a lot. And obviously as an organizer, you have action steps for days, right? But if I am someone who is like, I'm very new to this political world. I'm just, I just want to be a more involved citizen of my community. I want to really support how the political world or policy can better impact the Black community based on whatever my issue areas of interest are. And I'm trying to just figure out what is that first step? What is that first step to start to get involved? What would you say is that first step?
My first step, I have two because, whatever. I think it goes hand in hand. Like, first step, if someone were to ask you today, who's your state rep, who's your state senator, who's your city council member, who's your county commissioner, would you know the answer? And if the answer is yes, because I've been here, I've done that, great. We're gonna move up to the second part of this step. But this part is like really important because you need to know who just won. Who won, who was elected. There was a lot of shifts across the state, including redistricting, right? And what that means. Some of us are not in the same districts that we think we were because we were changing, our geographic areas were changing. And so we have different elected officials that were just elected. And now that the elections are there, look them up. MinnesotaVotes.org, look at the results and the summaries, find out who just won. Follow those people, find out where they are on social media or however you get your information. Social media, directly message them, ask them for their phone numbers, look them up, Google them. I'm sure you could find it in like 10 seconds, right? Like we can find their contacts. This is the world that we live in where who they hear from matters. And if they have not heard from you and you don't know who they are, you don't know how to follow them and you're gonna hear what other people tell you. So like, that's the first part. Find out who they are, who won, and like start just follow, no matter if you voted for them or not, follow them. Like you now live in their district, find out who represents you. The other part of that is make a little grocery list. And I tell people this all the time, like 5 things. And this is whether you're a seasoned politician or a seasoned political activist, an organizer every day who has given their all to this campaign and these individuals. Like I see Sister Janae Bates on here. I'm like, I know you know what this looks like to organize and talk with people, but sometimes we all need a refresher on what's important to us individually. So like looking at the top 5 like issues that are important to you. For me, housing right now is a big thing. As a new homeowner, I also look and go back to my mom and my brother and I recognize how much they spend every year on rent in rural Minnesota. It's not as low as people think, right? Homelessness in rural Minnesota looks a lot different than homelessness in the Twin Cities. But at the same time, my mother's rent has increased by 200% since we first moved in our property in 2006. And when we look at just the cost of living, my mom's income has not increased by 200%, but her space and what she's able to access has. And so when I look at housing, it's always been a key issue for me, always, no matter where I was. But I make this grocery list almost every major election cycle, so I know what I stand for and what is important for me. And I would say, you don't need a degree for that. You don't need to know how the policy conversations look. You literally go home, right? The 5 things that mean the most to you, your kids, your babies, their babies, your family. Go have that conversation if you need to with your family and do that so that way you can be grounded. So and let's just say in an off chance tomorrow, you're in a meeting and somebody goes, Cheniqua, this election is so crazy. It's just been this and that. You'd be like, I know. But I care about housing, education, reproductive rights, and restoring the vote because I think everybody has their rights to vote. And when you talk through the space and you go through like the list of things that reply to you, those conversations start to happen. You find yourself in those direct rooms because you're going to be an echo chamber for the next 2 years, like for sure. Like, these are the things that are care for me. When I'm across the room from the governor, when he asks, so Cheniqua, how do you think about the elections? I'll be like, yeah. I'm gonna need you to restore the vote. I need you to come in through for affordable housing. I need you to do something about Black reparations. And I need you to do something about my body, because it's my right to choose. Those things that come through those tidbits of 5 minutes make a lot of difference. And so those would be my two things, like find out who just won, because it's crazy and confusing. And then get your top 5 things that you care about. And let's just start there. Start there, and like the rest will kind of fall into place afterwards.
Thank you so much for that, Cheniqua. I'm taking your advice as well, because I think a lot of times, even for people who have been in the work of maybe you're in activism or community engagement, empowerment, you think that you have those issues like in your mind, top of mind. But what you really raised was like, no, I have to sit with my spirit. I have to sit with the internal essence of me and who I am, and think about what really does matter to me. Where are my values, and how can I connect my values to my public life, right? How I connect my values to my engagement with my community and with the decision makers who are a part of my society. So I absolutely love that. And as you all heard from Cheniqua, those 2 key action steps, if you have not done them already, is look up who represents you and build your grocery list of issue items that you care about. So I just want to say thank you so much, Cheniqua, for this conversation. I hope that you all got a lot out of it. I hope that you all are really inspired and empowered for what can be done to uplift our community, especially in the political arena, when it comes to policy making, when it comes to advocacy. We all have some piece of this puzzle that we should be holding together in this work. I'm really excited for how the African American Leadership Forum will continue to step into this space as well. And we invite you all in that work. We are a community organization, and we cannot do this work without our community. So thank you all for your time today. As a reminder, please consider contributing to our Give to the Max campaign that is running between now and November 17th. In addition, we shared this information earlier in the call, but we are hosting community listening sessions on employment in the Black community as we are continuing in our United by Black initiative. And so that information is in the chat. We have 2 listening sessions in December. You can join any one of them. And we just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your presence. We are greatly appreciative to share space with you today. And you all have a great afternoon. Thank you so much. Take care.